everyone. Post-lunch crowd. Keep coming in if you want to. Free books on the tables. Thank you for having me. I hope you're having a good time here. I'm going to talk a bit about design for belonging, but I wanted to give you a little bit of grounding first in where this work comes from and how I developed my perspective for this work. So I was supposed to go to Washington when I graduated from college, but at the last minute, I got kind of nervous about all those young men in blue blazers, and instead I moved to the San Francisco Bay Area without really a plan. I fell into the early days of what we would now call EdTech. At the time, it was called edutainment. It was the CD-ROM era. So yes, I am dating myself in time and place here. But it was the CD-ROM era, and all the publishing companies who had properties like cartoons like the Animaniacs, or books like Frog and Toad Are Friends, or Danny and the Dinosaur, were trying to figure out what they could do with these new technologies. And that's what I fell into. Of course, since I had thought I was going to Washington, I hadn't really planned for a career in tech, but I was really intrigued by what we could do. And my first thought as we were building educational games for young children was, well, we're all 20-somethings. We got to go hang out with some 5-year-olds if we really want to understand the Animaniacs or Frog and Toad Are Friends. So we did that. And that, I think, was the seed of what I would much later learn as human-centered design. I took that work and continued with the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, where I helped to lead the Interactive Educational Technology group. Technology was progressing. We were starting to do really interesting things with artist videos and the web. And we, again, took a kind of very human-centered look at the work, and we would spend time in the galleries really trying to understand what kinds of questions people had about the art so that we could design interactions and use technologies in a way that would help them to learn and engage. That led me to Stanford because I had been doing things that were educational for a while, but I had no background. So I went to do a doctorate in learning sciences and technology design. And serendipitously, I happened to land there just at the time that the D.school was being formed. So the Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design, which there was a long tradition at Stanford of product design, sitting at the intersection of art and technology. Of technology, of engineering, technology, and art. That product design tradition was being transformed as people in lots of different disciplines were thinking about how to use this approach of design in different domains. And that is what became crystallized as the methods of the D.school. So since I was there trying to learn about how people learn, I decided that I wanted to investigate how we could use design thinking with educators. And so we did a bunch of work, tons of experiments, from building spaces to building online communities to building new methods and curriculum models. We tried to do prototypes in all these different domains of education to understand what design could unlock. And what we really found is that it unlocked the teachers, who were, of course, incredible, creative individuals who were trying to do this work in schools and were often kind of pulled away from their creative identities, and bringing back a design frame helped them tap back into it. And as we did that work, and it grew into a national movement, an international movement, we also started to grapple with the fact that some of the schools that were taking up this work were the wealthiest schools in this country, and others that were trying to do it were not. And as we were faced with that conundrum and this really big divide, we wanted to ensure that design was actually a process that all young people, including those furthest from opportunity, were invited to participate in, could learn the power of their own creative choices, voices, and use the tools of design to create their world. And as we did that, we were working with educators. We were trying to help them think about the equity challenges in their school. And could they use their design mindsets that were getting them grounded in their own creativity? Could we use those design mindsets to actually work on the things that really mattered most in their school, which were their equity challenges. And as we did that, there was an interesting thing that we started to notice. There was kind of this freeze and this orientation towards the technical as opposed to the relational when confronted with the equity challenges in their schools. And those are things like disproportionate disciplinary data, some kids being suspended more than other kids, and that those patterns had often racial dimensions to them. So as we were grappling with this hard stuff, we saw people kind of freeze up, folks that had otherwise been kind of free with their design mindsets. And we wanted to understand how we could break through that they could use that same creativity on really their hardest problems. And that's what led me to the notion of working with a framework of othering and belonging. There's a conference happening across the Bay right now, too, called the Othering and Belonging Conference. There's an institute at Cal called the Othering and Belonging Institute. It's led by a person named John Powell, and he and his co-author, Stephen Menendian, had written a piece framing othering and belonging. And because we had this prototyping approach, this desire to try things safely and quickly and see how they worked, we decided to try just a little bit of this text around belonging with these educators that were trying to use their design mindsets to grapple with their equity challenges. And it was quite a revelation. They suddenly could remember a time when they didn't feel like they belonged. And that felt acquaintance that they had with what belonging really means unlocked their ability to think about their challenges. It wasn't the abstraction of equity anymore. It was the feeling of belonging that they were going for. And don't get me wrong, the data still really matters, and some of those technocratic processes that educators and government officials use are incredibly important. But to really design for belonging, I think you have to connect with that feeling. So that was the work that we did to unpack it that led to this book, and there are copies for you there. And still now in this moment, the essential question that I'm trying to pursue is, can you design belonging? So just think for a moment for yourself, are you a yes or a no? And I'll share that I'm a yes and a no. And why? Because belonging is a feeling. I can't design your belonging. You can't design somebody else's belonging. You can only design things, all kinds of different things, right? From platforms to park benches. You can design things where belonging might be able to occur. And that's what we're here to talk about now. So I want to do an exercise. The part of the invitation for me to be here today was to make it interactive. That's what we do at the D.school. So I'm going to ask you to do just a short meditation. Don't get freaked out. This is nothing crazy woo-woo. It's just a body scan. And what I'm going to do is just talk you through your body and ask you to think about, are there any stories of belonging that are hiding in your body? As I talk you through your body, you're gonna think about that question. Where am I feeling belonging in my body? And so to do it, you don't have to close your eyes, but you might want to cast them down. If your legs are crossed, you might want to uncross them. Just kind of feel like you're here in the room. We're gonna do this body scan, and I'm just gonna talk you through it. So you're gonna start with your feet. Feel into your feet, noticing there, where you are, what that means to you. You might wiggle your toes, feel into your ankles. I did this once with somebody who, when we got to the ankles, that was where afterwards she said, wow, my ankles, I have a slight tinge of pain there from an old injury. And that time when I had that injury, I remember how people helped me to carry my books and to get me food. She was a college student. And that slight pain in my ankle reminds me of belonging because people showed up for me, and that was a symbol of belonging. Okay, you're at your ankles. You're moving up your legs to your knee, your thighs, your hips, your groins, into your belly. Take a nice breath there. Move on up to your heart center, maybe into your throat. Around to your shoulders. You can roll your shoulders down to your elbows, wrists, fingers, and back up to your shoulders. Roll those again, because our shoulders are always in need of a good roll. Any stories of belonging that you're feeling in your body as you move up the back of your head, around to your face, your eyes, your nose, your mouth, your chin. Any stories of belonging that are coming for you? So belonging is a feeling. Community is a place where we can feel it and sometimes we don't. So that's the thing that we want to be grappling with. Lots of different ways to talk about what belonging is and how it feels like. And part of this, for me, is just to encourage you to start with yourself. Think about times and places where you feel a sense of belonging and to bring that felt acquaintance with what belonging really means to the work that we do to build and support communities. The opposite of belonging, as I shared in that framework, is othering. And these are some of the ways that othering feels. It might actually lead to feeling invisible or erased, right? Reduced or diminished. And sometimes that's intentional, right? We can think historically and in our current moment of very explicit efforts that people make to do othering. And then there are all kinds of subtle ways where othering can occur. So we want to be aware of othering as belonging's kind of persistent opposite force. Sometimes when we think about belonging, our mind can go to times when we didn't belong. And that's also really fruitful for design, to notice what didn't feel like belonging. And for me, when I started doing this work, I went right to it. And I actually had a conversation with my mom, and we came up with this photograph. I'm the elder, and my sister did one day grow into those ears. And this is my mother's second wedding. And I tell the story in the book, and in the book I also share that I really love my stepfather now. At this moment, all I felt was a lack of belonging. I didn't know why I was wearing the outfit. I didn't know why we were at this church. I fundamentally didn't feel like I was invited or had any way to participate or contribute. I am certain that this was not my mother's or my future stepfather's intention, and yet it was the experience that I had. So just recognize that as you start to think about belonging, you might think about times when you didn't feel that you belong. And that can be really fruitful because it allows us to think about what was and wasn't designed to create those feelings. So the framework is very simple. The book is organized around feeling, seeing, and shaping belonging. And when we talk about seeing, here I'm talking about particular moments of belonging. And I'm going to share 9 here. We're not going to talk about them all in depth. But they're an offering for you to think about what your moments of belonging might be and the kinds of things that you're creating or facilitating or leading. Because we all have different moments of belonging, and design thrives in specificity. So picking up on particular moments really matters. For the interaction designers in the group, I'm telling you something you know full well. But some of the moments of belonging that we know are really important are, of course, the invitation. How did we know to get here today, right? And then that moment of entering. How did it feel to come in? What's that moment like? Participating, whether minimally or fully, is another moment of belonging. As are, I call out code switching, contributing, and flow. That's that social psychological sense of being really in something. That's clearly a moment of belonging, usually. And contributing is one that I didn't think about that much when I first started this work, but it came in so many stories that people told. And code switching is that remembering, that noticing that we all have multiple identities and we participate in dominant cultural forces and non-dominant ones. And some folks have to do a lot of switching between based on their identity. That is a cognitive load, but it's also an incredible skill. And so paying attention to moments where you notice code switching can be a really interesting clue to where to work on belonging. And finally, the last three in this map are repairing, dissenting, diverging, and exiting. We often don't pay attention to these very much, and they really matter, and they are also moments of belonging. As much as the invitation and the entering are, these are. Repairing, we know that harms happen. Communities of all kinds need ways to repair and recover. And then dissenting, I'll tell a story about that in just a second. So these are these initial 9 moments of belonging that I think can really help us focus on designing. So entering, again, you can go back to this morning or the last time you went to somewhere new that you'd have been invited in. Sometimes there's a disconnect between the invitation and the actual entering, something to pay attention to. Classic examples, of course, are signage, right? Simply saying that you belong here can sometimes be a real help. And then more elaborate rituals, and also ways to offer different ways to actually do the entering. Contributing, I think, as I shared, is one that we know a lot about in a lot of contexts, and in others we somehow overlook it, but it's very important for belonging. This is an image of folks that I worked with as co-designers on a design challenge during the heart of the pandemic. This was a mixture of designers by profession and co-designers who were young people who had very recently been experiencing homelessness. And we worked together to create solutions during the pandemic when things were totally closed down. And the experience that those young co-designers had in working with us was really, as they shared, was really a profound one of belonging, of being heard and knowing that their contribution mattered. And then dissenting, as I shared, I think in our culture, it's an image of a black hat. And it's a hat because of some of my colleagues who know that their teams are not great with seeking critical feedback, hearing dissenting voices, working to get alternate opinions. Put a black hat on the table in their conference room so that they can practice, so that they can say, hey, it's time for some dissenting opinions. What are the dissenting opinions? And if they don't have a dissenting opinion in the room at the moment, they seek one because they know that that will help them. It will help improve their work, but it also is a symbol and a sign to everybody in that room that they can share perhaps more of themselves than they thought they could. So investigating the moments that matter is a key piece of the work of design for belonging. So I'm going to switch us to a brief activity. On your table, you've got a little worksheet. It looks a little bit like this in black and white version. And I want to just offer you a few moments. I think they're going to put on a little background music in just a second. We're going to take 3 minutes, do a little bit of sketching, just with starting to think about, with this frame of belonging, times and places where you felt it, and times and places where you haven't. A simple journey map can help us to think about that. Anybody notice any particular kinds of moments? Entering, or invitation, or dissent, or contributing? Yeah. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you. For me, I noticed the overwhelming feeling of feeling one with my community. So yoga community, a healing center. Also, I've noticed feelings of belonging when walking on the beach. It's as if like I belong to Earth.
Yeah.
Feeling.
Yeah. I've heard a fair amount of that in these kinds of conversations. Thank you. Yeah. The belonging can be much bigger than the things that we create. Yeah. Thank you. So the third piece, right? We've talked a little bit about feeling belonging, seeing belonging in particular moments, and then the third piece of design for belonging is shaping belonging, reminding us how many tools in the world we have to help support belonging. And you may be working in a particular platform or a particular thing where it might feel like your tools are limited, but let your mind go for just a moment and think a little bit broadly. So we have space, role, ritual, events, groupings. We heard a little bit earlier today about affinity groups, clothing, communications, food, schedules, and rhythms. These are all tools that we have. We're not just limited, right, to meetings and email to create belonging. I really like thinking about space, and of course that could be literal physical space or virtual space. This story comes to us, it's a classic story we tell at the D.school of the industrial designer Doug Dietz, who was a designer for GE Healthcare, creating MRI machines. And he had an experience after he started to think from a more human-centered perspective of how terrifying his machines were for young people. And he did a whole lot of work to get to know young, terminally ill children and their families and to understand more about them. And he ended up creating the Adventure series, which uses space. The technology remains exactly the same, uses paint and decals like you would have on buses to transform the space to a space where the young children really do belong, where there's a story that shapes their experience of why they're there. If they're at the cozy camp, what you're seeing on the top there, right? If they're very quiet, they are very still, they might see the fireflies. And this might seem just like a fanciful way to decorate a room, but in the hospitals where this Adventure series is installed, the rates where folks need to be, where the young children need to be sedated, go from something over 90% to under 10%. So it has a very radical impact on that experience. And I think that this is not just a story about his empathy, which it is from a design perspective. It's also a story of belonging, how helping folks know that they are a part of something helps them to relax and have the medical care that they need. I love thinking about roles. Dream directors are a redesigned for belonging version of the guidance counselor. Instead of just drilling kids on where they are in terms of their credits, we're inviting young people to state their dreams and make a path towards those. A new role that is really about belonging. And then schedules and rhythms, I think this is one that we really could investigate more. We have so many ways that we don't think that we can change the way we use time on a daily or seasonal, right, or annual basis. A very simple example, my friend Chris Rudd, who leads a design group in Chicago called Shy by Design, was starting. They were a small crew. They were just starting out. He was getting some help on, setting up the employee handbook and kind of the HR systems for the emerging organization. And the person he was working with said, so what are our holidays going to be as part of our benefits package? And his first response was, the usual ones? And to which the person he was speaking with said, well, they don't have to be. And that's the radical act to say things don't have to be the way they always have been. And so this firm now celebrates Diwali, which is this picture is intended to remind us of, and Ghanaian Independence Day, because those are the holidays that actually matter for that team. So a simple example, just to remind us that we can work with time and schedules and rhythms in new ways to create greater belonging. So the work of shaping is really to expand and explore your design levers, and you may have many more levers, right, at your disposal or within the platforms in which you work. And just to kind of close this out with the why does design for belonging matter? It matters for lots of reasons. One reason is a deep human need. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's right there in the middle. Apparently his students, doing further research, really thought it could even be lower on the pyramid. We as humans fundamentally need to feel that we belong. And it's fundamental to building the world that we want to inhabit. We have too many examples, extreme examples of othering, and subtler ones too. So I think a call for designers is really to think about how do we, in fact, situate belonging as a thing that is one of the most important outcomes of our work. Jeffrey Cohen is a social psychologist at Stanford, and he says, and this is a book that came out since my book that has a lot of the social psychological research. So I wanted to call it out because you may be interested in it. It's a very approachable research-based book. And he says, a sense of belonging isn't just a byproduct of success, which is somewhat how we think of it, right? If you think for a second, that really, but all the research shows that it's not just a byproduct of success, but a condition for it. In school, work, homes, healthcare settings, negotiations, politics, community policing, and virtually every domain in which humans deal with other humans. And the last quote I wanted to share is from John Powell. It's from that original text that I started prototyping with educators, which then led to this book, which is on your table now. And this portrait of him is in that book too. Belonging means more than just being seen. Belonging entails having a meaningful voice and the opportunity to participate in the design of social and cultural structures. Belonging means having the right to contribute to and make demands on society and political institutions. And we can work on it. This framework is feeling, seeing, and shaping.